I'd like to introduce Bobbi Miracle. She owns her own firm, actually, Commercial Executives Real Estate Services, but she's also been in the real estate market for a really long time. So, Bobbi?
Hi. Okay, just slide it on through. Yeah. Oh, perfect. There we go. Cassie, I had to applaud you. I loved how your presentation on all the water is really, it was on. I think you did a great job on that.
Yeah, that was really very involved with government affairs.
As I'm really passionate about trying to get us more land, and a lot of people think that we don't have the resources to grow what we do. So,
Well, and that was something I was going to piggyback off of right there. So yeah, my name's Bobbi Miracle. I'm a broker here in town, and I specialize in office, industrial, and unanchored retail, and then investment real estate. So the joke was Lisa called and said, "Hey, talk about lease versus buy." I teach these classes all over the country for 4 days. And then the session I'm going to give you is 2 hours, and I've got 15 minutes. So if I talk over your head or if there's any questions on it, just raise your hand and stop me. I'm totally fine with that. Some of the stuff that Cassie was talking about, Cassie, how many developable parcels are there left in our valley? Isn't it like 11 that are a good size?
yeah. So what we'd say in commercial is any within the SNPLMA boundary, which is, like she said, a whole nother session, there's a boundary allocated from DLN that we technically have access to. But within there, they call it 11. But if you look at it, most of them have what we call over 12% grade or slope on the property. So the cost to make it flat with the extra expansive soil or digging it up for commercial development. So for commercial, yeah, 3, 8.
Yeah, there's no good property left in our valley, and you see all of this land everywhere. We don't have any right to it. It's owned by the Bureau of Land Management. And the cost to purchase it starts at the appraised value. Well, that's really great. You can't get a deal on it to then try and offset your costs of construction. So that's why everybody says, well, there's so much land. There isn't. And our valley is really, really tight right now. The other thing is, it takes 2 years minimum to make a development happen. By the time you go through plans, I've been trying to separate one little parcel of land. We signed the offer in July of 24. I just extended it for another 90 days. I mean, that's just a separated parcel because the government entities also work 4 days a week. They're overwhelmed. They're swamped. It's hard to get everything through. And so we're seeing that as kind of a downfall for its development and why our pricing has gone so high. So the real question is, who in here has tried to lease or buy a building in the last 2 years? Anybody? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Couple. As you go around, you see signs on properties, you see all of these different things. There isn't a broker in town that isn't saying, I need more listings. On average, we all love to have 20, 30 listings in our back pocket that you can pull out of and things like that. But there isn't the available properties, which Cassie was talking about. Now, in this submarket, there is. There's a lot of available space in the opportunity zones that are redeveloping. We saw a huge shift in our market when we built the 215, and everybody wanted to be on the 215. Once they brought all the utilities out there, development happened overnight. And if you drive, I was just out in the Southwest over for Sunset in the 215. It went from zero construction out there to there are warehouses everywhere you look at. The highest priced warehouses in our market, by the way. And a lot of times a warehouse is more expensive than an office building in today's day and age. But the obsolescence of our old buildings, parking ratios, if you're an office tenant, you want a larger parking ratio so your employees can park and your visitors. Those parking ratios down here are like 3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet you lease. The newer buildings are 6 and 7. And so, it's a lot nicer for your employees to park, for your visitors to show up and things like that. So we're seeing this huge shift, but it also parallels with the rates. You're $4 or $5 a foot in the Southwest. Down here, you're $1 a foot. So we talk that vacancy factor is really polar opposite of what is going on. So when is it the right time to lease? For when you're talking to people about that, the time to lease or buy is when somebody actually looks at how much money they have in the bank. That's the big part of it. It costs a lot to buy a building. It costs a lot to maintain a building. And when you're the owner of the building, you have to have that capital set aside. When you're leasing, there's a lot of positives to leasing. You don't have to put a lot of capital outlay, and you can go take a space and the owner puts all the money into it. The other thing is they take care of everything. That's a real positive for you. But on the sales side, hey, I like control. I'm all about control in my life, by the way. I control everything I do. All the way down to if I could control my teenagers, it would be and butter. I went to college. And so I only do it with a credit card. But I'm going to show you a couple financial comparisons of really when we're evaluating whether a tenant should lease or buy, what it'll do to them. For some additional ideas, this is a building that was built out in the southwest part of the valley. I'm not going to tell you which project it is, but Cassie's company leases it. But in 2018, when they developed the first building out there, their land value was $20 a foot that they had paid to buy the land. And construction costs were about $115 a foot. When they started adding in all of their stuff, the total project cost about $236 a foot to pull the entire project out of the ground with all of their information. When they built the last building in 2024, look at their financing costs alone. They tripled. The land value went up by $30 a foot, and the value went up so much on how much capital they had to outlay to even get the building to a shell condition. This is before they even put all the improvements in it.
Essentially the same building from
Essentially
20 to
the exact same buildings.
a sister building, like almost exactly looking.
And you can see the lease rates. They were $265 coming out. Now, the last building, because I don't have those numbers of what it's cost, they're over $5 a foot if you want to go in there. Construction costs. And then this is the allocation they were giving to the tenants to be able to put their tenant improvements in. But when we look at tenant improvement costs, I got in the business in 2001. New carpet and paint was $5 a foot. We quoted it to everybody. You need new carpet and paint? Great, we'll give you $5 a foot. That gave you really nice carpet. Now you can't get a painter to show up for $5 a foot. Kind of idea with the cost of paint. But these are the allowances that landlords were offering and actual costs of what they were giving. So in 2004, it was costing $45 a foot to build out a beautiful office with all sorts of windows and doors and gorgeous items. Now it's over $175 a foot for the same building. It's a 133% increase. So I find a lot of my buyers and my tenants go, why should I pay that? So-and-so signed a lease 5 years ago for $2 a foot. Now you want me to pay $4 for the same building. And it's just really looking at it. I sold a building up in Summerlin. The owner was able to pick it up during our last recession for about $250 a foot. My client's in escrow at $600. And his wife is really mad. She kept saying, why are we having to pay so much? They shouldn't make that much. And that's been the joke about it. But the facts are, I understand both sides. And so you kind of sit back and go, well, they've gotten all the appreciation. The question is, are we going to continue to see that appreciation? And I think the answer is probably yes, especially if you're buying in a Summerlin or an Anthem or something like that, where there's nothing else to build. And we don't control the land. Howard Hughes controls Summerlin. Those pockets aren't going to be resold. So as Cassie said, they're bringing another 800,000 feet out to lease. You can't purchase it. And unless you have, 500-600 million waiting around to buy that building from them, it's not going to happen. So the advantages of leasing, and this is the big thing I talk about with people about. If you can take the capital that's in your business, that you have sitting in your bank account, reinvest it in your business and make more off of that than what you're going to make owning your building, you should put the money back in your business and make more money and lease. But if the problem with leasing, you get the flexibility. Well, it's not a problem. It's a great thing. If I don't like this space, I don't like this landlord, I don't like the new tenant next to me, you move. You go find a new space. You can contract, you can expand. For medical on that side of it, I think obsolescence is a big deal. When all of the exam rooms change or sizing changes or, new beds and things like that, you become obsolete in some of your areas. And so the leasing idea gives that flexibility of relocating. The other thing is it's a landlord's responsibility. I think roof leaks are my favorite. Roofs, we went, 367 days at one point without a drop of rain, of measurable rain in this valley. That next week, I wish I owned a roofing company. Every roof in Vegas leaked. It was just crazy. So, but you put that back on the landlord. And the other thing is when you lease, it's a shorter term commitment. People want to sign 1-year leases. Landlords don't like 1-year leases. Banks don't like 1-year leases. Banks want a minimum of a 5-year deal. Otherwise, they don't value it the same for the people that own the property. So there's a huge thing of, oh, I'll sign a 1 or a 2 or maybe a 3. Most of my owners say, we'll look at a minimum of a 3. They have to pay more, but on a 5, we'll start making concessions. And so it's really because the banks have told them to. By the way, it's not necessarily an owner doesn't want it. An owner, if they sign a 1-year lease, they pay less to the broker. So it's, a lot less out of cash for them.
But they give any TI allowance, they also don't have as much time to amortize that over a shorter term lease as well. So if you want a shorter term lease, you have to think about, would you invest in something? If you're putting up money, would you rather have a 3 or 5-year payback on an initial cash outlay? So that's also why you'll typically see very little, if any, TI lines or concessions from the landlord on a short term.
If you looked at taking this space, a 3-year lease, take it as is. 5-year lease, you probably get some walls and some flooring and paint. Yeah, and it's just a typical response from any owner. It's a great point, Cass. You buy, you get the advantages big time. Your mortgage payments pay down your equity. You have control again. Big control of property. You can do what you want in there, unlike when you have a lease. If you want to paint your building pink, go for it. I always think of the little pink house that was at Tropicana and Rainbow, that they, by the way, tried to lease for numerous years. Nobody would let them paint their building pink, and they ultimately got that house and were able to rezone it. So I just love that case. Protection against these rent increases. Rent is only going to continue to go up in the foreseeable future. There is not options for people to lease, so you have to just bite the bullet and pay for it because owners have no reason. There's tenants everywhere looking, and so it's such a competitive market out there to go through it. The other thing is, in ownership, you get appreciation and additional tax benefits. If you're an owner user, a standard setup would be your LLC or corporation buys the building, then you that own the company also lease back. You're kind of getting double tax benefits in all sorts of areas. So there's a lot of positives to being an owner user on that aspect. Are there any questions? Okay. So I'm going to give you a little financial example to put some numbers to this. And this is where it's going to get a little bit confusing on where I might go, but just hold with me on that. So I use an average building. If you were to say lease in the southwest quarter of the valley, these would be realistic numbers, what the Southwest is going for right now. 5,000 square foot building at $3 a foot. Annually, you're going to pay about $180,000 in rent. And then we standardly have annual increases. 3% is a little bit on the low side for some markets. At one point, I had a client pay 7% in an industrial building because we were seeing such incredible inflation and the owner didn't really want them. They had so many options. It was kind of like, well, pay the increase or don't take my space. So this gets kind of small, but when you lease, you still get a tax savings. On average, we estimate 21% because that's the corporate tax rate right now. So you do have your cash flows after tax lower. So your pricing of leasing on an annual basis does come down on your tax return when you look at it. But what we talk about a lot, and this is kind of the difference of working with brokers that understand this side versus ones that are just running numbers. The cost of capital is really who's got money in the stock market? It's been good recently, right? You could get 10%, 12% on some of these stock markets. We call that your opportunity cost. It's the opportunity of what you can make if you put your money somewhere else versus in your business. When we do that, I averaged a 10% is just what I assumed. Most people can find some sort of investment in the last couple of years that was making them about 10%. We want to value our leases of what it would cost you today. So when we do this, it tells us that our lease value is about $987,000. What that means is that you took $978,000 and put it in a 10% interest-bearing account, that it would pay off your whole lease over that time. So you want to figure out what your money's worth today. And that's how we value our lease versus buy options. So if that lease was going to cost me $978,000 today, we want to take a look at that against what it would cost us to sell the building or buy the building. This same building is worth about $600 a foot. you'd have to pay $3 million. And if you put about 25% down, which some banks want a lot more, by the way, you're going to have a minimum of $828,000 as a down payment. So your loan's going to be about $1.6 million. Now, when you're estimating these things, you have to figure out what the future value of that building is going to be. If this building appreciated at 2% over the next 10 years, it'd be worth about $3.6 million. So you really want to see, and 2% is probably a pretty good rate of what it would be. When you do these kind of things, for your clients, you always want to figure out what their initial outlay is. If they don't have $828,000 to put in their bank or to give to the bank right now, they should not even be discussing it. When you're doing a lease, you put down a security deposit and first month's rent, maybe some TIs. That's a totally different ballgame than just shy of $800,000, you know. We take all their after tax cash flows, but the big numbers that change when you analyze lease versus buy is if they sell the building. If these people sold this building in 10 years, they would get a check for $2 million after they paid off their loan and all those kind of things. When you value all that, it gives us in today's value, that building's worth like $1.1 billion. All this is doing is telling you which one's cheaper to buy or lease. It's cheaper to lease in today's market for this same building. And the next step you go through is, okay, what are your growth plans? Is your business going to grow? Can you last in a space for 10 years? Office tenants a lot of times say yes. Industrial a lot of times says, And then the question is, do they want to have to go buy another facility? A lot of times people say, I need 2 facilities, you know, one on the west side, one on the east side of town. I don't know about any of you. I don't cross the strip. I'm a Summerlin girl. If I have to go visit my friends in Anthem, we meet at Town Square because it's too far. You know, I don't pack a lunch. And so you have to think about that, but it works for our clients just the same way too. Capital availability. Again, finding that capital for the initial down payments is a big deal for clients. Market conditions. Our market's strong. I don't care what the news is putting out there. Every broker in this town is the busiest we have ever been since, I would say, 90. I was in college in the 90s. I would say, 2015, 16, 17, times were really busy. We saw a huge drag down. The last 4 or 5 months, we don't even have time to go to networking events anymore. We all have to be able at the office working. And it's pretty funny. 12, 13 hours on the industrial teams, absolutely true right now. An expected length of occupancy, really 7 to 10 years is a good expectation at minimum if you're even going to consider buying a building. It doesn't make sense to do that. So really what all this says to you, if you were going to buy or lease the same building and you were going to pay $1.1 million in today's value to own it, or $978,000 to lease it in today's market, we estimated that we were going to grow by 2%. The neat thing is when you evaluate all your numbers, if it grew by 3.5%, it didn't make any difference. And so tenants can look back and go, gosh, if I really think the expectation is our market's going to have a 3.5% increase in value each year over the next 10 years, then it makes more sense to own the buildings. And so there's a big question mark that comes there. Do I think everything appreciates at 3.5%? No. Did the Summerlin market around the TPC appreciate huge? Absolutely. Took like a 15, 18% appreciation. However, that area is considered a little bit older now. And so you look over and you go into downtown Summerlin in that area. Buildings are ranging at I just did a broker opinion value, $785 to $825 a foot for that building. No. Pardon? Broker price. Broker price opinion. Why did they like broker no? Oh, yeah. It depends on who I'm writing it for. Yeah, broker price opinion. Look at Cassie. See, I'm not the broker of my office. I can say what I want.
Your mother.
And that is true. My mother is my boss. All over here. And she's out of town, so she can't say anything. Again, when we're not allowed to video. When the bottom line, if you're going to lease or you're going to buy, no matter what, you're paying for that space that you're going to be in. Doesn't matter. And so, but you really have to dive down into the numbers to figure out what makes the most sense. Leasing right now is difficult. Medical office, I represented a medical office group that needed 10,000 feet. They would have spent, if I could have found in a building, he did not care what he was going to pay to buy a building. He just wanted to own something. We could find zero. There was not one building in the entire valley that worked for him. He ended up desperately didn't want to go into the hospital buildings. He had to go in the hospital buildings. We could not find, and by the way, there was one space in all of the South and Northwest that fit his face. One. That's pretty crazy when you look at all of this vacancy that's out there. And so it's really patience, I think, is what a lot of people need to learn in this market. And then being realistic. You have to be realistic. I don't know what news channel, and they do this to Cassie. They just did it to her on some stuff. You know, when you speak in a presentation or things like that, everybody's looking for the quotes that we've changed from a tenant market or a landlord market or back and forth. We're not either right now. Tenants are paying really high prices. Landlords don't have much vacancy, but they need tenants. And finding that in between has become really difficult. So my only suggestion is for anybody trying to do it, you have to work with brokers that actually know the market and are really well versed. And I think that's the big problem, is that everybody in our market has a real estate license. It used to be the joke. You know, there's 15, 18,000 people with a real estate license in our market right now, of which there's about 800 commercial agents. Of that, there's about 200 that do primary the deals. On the residential side, we just bought a house. I had an agent represent us. It was the worst experience of my life. She was horrible, and I thought she was a good broker. And so you turn around and see that we thought we hired a professional, and it did not go well. But I don't do residential, so I needed the advice. And so it's really working in that environment that even as brokers, we represent, you know, we say, hey, we shouldn't be representing ourselves out of here too, and staying in our little line of expertise. I think I'm a doctor. Dr. Google says I am. So I diagnose everything by it, and I'm wrong a lot. So, you know, it's kind of those things. But, you know, when everybody's looking if they're going to do it, it's really look at your own company. You have to talk to your CPA. You have to talk to your financial advisor. They're the only two that can truly advise you on the numbers of what you should be doing, because it doesn't always make sense to do one or the other. However, with what the bank's putting out right now and some of the ways they can do notes and loans and everything for people and the different programs that the government's offering, it's always a great time to look at it and talk about it.